This is The Flower of Freedom by Deborah J. Reeves, and we've reached chapter 60. That chapter is called Han's Greatness. But before we begin this, I wanted to just give you a little preface. I think many of you are aware of a concept that you found in horror movies. People have spoken of the dark triad, but most people don't understand what it means. And I am a strong believer in being forearmed and forewarned. So I'm going to do my best to explain this concept with an illustration of Hans. I'm going to start reading this chapter now. Please remember that all rights to my original book and to this presentation are reserved. Here we go, Hans' Greatness. The happy group whispered excitedly as they walked through the quiet streets of the resort town to their hotel. The man on the night desk smiled a welcome. He asked if they had enjoyed their day. They responded that it was fantastic, and if he had not yet seen how the West was won, it was worth seeing. They asked for a 6 o'clock wake-up call, and he told them that it would come as promised, and it would be on time. They all wished him a good night. It was one of the best movies of my whole life, enthused Michaud. Nicole said, "That Gregory Peck will forever be my idea of the ideal man." Joseph wondered if he even had a chance. They went directly into the elevators, and they pressed up. The girls all got off one floor below the boys, and the car soon delivered the young men to their own floor. Without any ado, they went directly to their rooms. Someone called, "See you in the morning." Hans had been sitting in the corner of the lodge restaurant since 8 o'clock. He had another bottle of Niersteiner with his German-inspired dinner. Perhaps it was a second bottle of wine that made him slow, but when he thought he heard a group in the lobby, he wandered out and found the lobby empty. He asked the man at the desk if the group had arrived with a young man who looked just like him, and the night manager said, "No, sir. The last group to arrive was a family with 2 teenagers. They just went up in the elevator." Hans went back to his table to finish his second bottle of wine. There was at least 1 glass left in it, he thought. "I'll find them tomorrow," he assured himself. The Niersteiner wine and some familiar smells lubricated the wheels of Hans' memory. It opened his casket of grievances that he had been forced to ignore in order to get on with his life. Hans had been born with a great sense of destiny. From the moment his memories began, he knew he was far more intelligent than any of the adults in his life, most especially his mother, who always tried to control him. When he was very small, she had insisted on nutritious food. He wanted to eat what he wanted to eat. She wanted him to bathe and wear clean, pressed clothing. She insisted that he stay away from fire, the most fascinating thing in his little life. She tried to make him feel badly about wetting his bed. She changed his sheets every single morning. That was all about her ego, and he hated every minute of it. By the time he was starting school, he was in full-blown rebellion against her. She was not in control, and he would ensure that she never was. The teachers at the school were no better, but at least they blamed his mother for his behavior. The teachers were sometimes rapped his knuckles in an attempt to make him learn discipline. But while that seemed to upset the other children, physical pain never affected Hans. The only punishment he ever felt was when they took away something he wanted, like the time they found his cache of stolen toys, and they gave them back to all the children from whom he had stolen them. None of the kids liked him, but there was one little girl who came from an outcast family who lived near him. She would sometimes walk home with him or speak kindly to him. She seemed to see something good inside him. At least, that's what she said. His mother had histrionics when he went through his stage of exploration that included dissecting animals to see where the life and the movement came from. His father dismissed her concerns and told her to stay silent about it. He said that it was no one else's business and that boys would be boys. He had done the same thing when he was little, and he turned out just fine. Hans chuckled about that memory. He had never thought that his father was just fine. No one wanted to befriend his mother after their pets went missing, but where else was he supposed to get them? Hans wondered. His mother was weak and useless. As he grew, she was always trying to get her own way. She was always trying to take him to church. He barely remembered his father. He was an insipid and not very bright man. He ignored his wife unless she did not put on a good meal when he returned from his job at the mill. Then he would beat her so that she had to stay in the house for a week. Hans loved those times. It meant that she wouldn't show up unexpectedly or stand up for children he was bullying. When she was recovering from a beating, she was always less trouble. On one of those occasions when Hans was about 10, a girl from school and he were walking home on the most isolated stretch of the woods around the town, and he decided to play a prank on her to see if he could frighten her. That was the start of it. He did successfully prank her. She was so frightened by his sudden disappearance and the way he snuck up on her that she was shaking with fear. Hans was flooded by feelings of power and feelings that were overwhelming. It was as though witnessing her fear and her terror had brought out the creature within him that had always whispered to him of his destiny. He later knew that his mother and teachers had tried to suppress that destiny and make him small. He would show them all that he was great and powerful. It was as though a raging inferno had suddenly reached a layer of oxygen. His power was suddenly all-encompassing. He knew what his greatness demanded, and he did everything he had always wanted or thought about doing to the little girl. He remembered the terror in her eyes, and he could feel the resurgence of that memory in his anatomy even now. He hid her body in the cleft of some rocks, and went home. His mother knew something was up, but he just ignored her, and he went out to play. He was the first to see his father trudging home from work that night. He lured him into the woods, and he learned then all about male anatomy. It was not nearly as interesting as the little girl had been. Hans pushed the dead body into the pond nearby with a branch of a tree, and he went in to eat. His mother always made great Wiener Schnitzel. That's the end of this chapter, chapter 60. Thank you for spending the time with me. We've learned a little about what is involved in the dark triad and how it seems to have a power over certain people. Hope to see you for chapter 61. It's called Protective Instincts. Wishing you life's highest best, Deborah.